Good afternoon, everyone. I am Elizabeth Savage. I am a staff attorney and fellow with the Legal Aid of North Carolina's Disaster Relief Project. I'm joined by Casey Freeman.
Hello, everyone. This is Casey Freeman. I am a social worker with the Disaster Relief Project at Legal Aid.
Today, we're just going to have a conversation about how we're surviving on both fronts. We're going to discuss the disaster recovery process while also navigating a pandemic, both with legal perspectives and social work perspectives. So, to set the stage a little bit, we're in a dual disaster situation. We're at risk for one, at least on Eastern North Carolina, where we may be facing a natural disaster also while experiencing an infectious disease disaster. And that sets up a different environment, and it overlaps a lot in how resources can be accessed, and there's a huge change in the landscape for access to resources that we'll talk about a little bit today. And also for those of you that may be currently going through your recovery process, it feels like a triple disaster situation, right? You've got your previous disaster that you're still recovering from, you're going through a pandemic, and then there might be another one coming down the road. And so how are we going to best handle this? How can Legal Aid of North Carolina help you with any legal needs that you're having? Our project on the Disaster Relief Project, we have a great social work team that's here to assist our clients as well. So Casey can help offer some guidance on that today as well. But we're kind of going to get into just a little bit of how we can navigate this time, how you can still prioritize your recovery process while experiencing this pandemic. So Casey, do you want to offer just a little bit about what you do with social work on this project and what you're seeing right now with this dual and almost triple disaster scenario that we're experiencing?
Sure. So, a lot of my work with the disaster recovery team revolves around resources. I don't deal with the legal side of things. I deal with the day-to-day and the self-actualization things. So it may be somebody needing assistance with utility. It may be somebody needing assistance with mortgage, property tax, even things like respite care for individuals who are suddenly, in a situation where you may have young children or adult special needs children who are with you a lot more than they were before. And that can be very taxing on your individual's mental health. And so when we talk about this dual situation, you know, people are dealing with things like unemployment because of COVID, underemployment because of COVID. And that means that a lot more people are trying to access the already limited resources that were already out there. So we're seeing food banks overtaxed. We're seeing agencies that assist with utility bills and mortgage payments overtaxed. We're seeing housing situations with very long wait lists now that before might not have had these wait lists because now the coronavirus, which is a novel virus, which we, are just now beginning to have a real response to, really shook the landscape up for everyone in every aspect. We just were not prepared to suddenly have the influx of people who needed these services. And I think it's really shown us that the structures we had in place before are not, we can't go back to the way it was. Um, and so I've seen a lot with my clients of being really stressed because not, like you said, not only are they doing this rebuild application process, but now they're not working. So they're trying to understand how are they going to feed their family. They still, even though their houses may have been damaged in a storm, they still have to pay the mortgage. They still have to pay property taxes, and they don't have the money for that. So it can be a lot and overwhelming.
Absolutely. I'm seeing that too, where even without a pandemic going on in a recovery context, you have displacement. So what unfortunately happens if you're displaced from your home, you can no longer live there, but say you still have a mortgage on your home. You have to keep your mortgage payments, probably some insurance payments if you're able to still keep the insurance up. And now you have to pay rent. And so you're juggling and carrying all of this financial stress as a result of the natural disaster that happened. And then with this extra layer of the pandemic, we're seeing it's almost like essential needs being prioritized over other essential needs. And so things like rent payments and mortgage payments that are not, food or clothing or water or utility bills. I mean, those types of things get prioritized. And then now we're sort of seeing this housing crisis going on where there's an uptake in foreclosures, uptake in evictions. Um, and, there are some legal protections that are out there right now. We have the CDC moratorium. That is a recent development. Previously, there's the CARES Act, and those are all federal protections. And there were some executive orders specifically for North Carolina that helped there for a bit. Um, so, but it just, from the social work side, I don't know about you, but I'm just sort of seeing this and I feel like it's just not enough. There's so many people still struggling, and how do you best handle, I suppose, going back to that financial stress, in a recovery process, it can be such the long-term piece. I mean, there are people that we're still working on recovery from Matthew from 2016, recovery specifically for our project. We focus on Florence, which is 2016, so 2018, 2016. With the stress of that long-term recovery, and then now trying to handle stress of the day-to-day life during a pandemic. I mean, how can we do that? How can we best organize our recovery process and keep up with things, but do it in a manageable way that does not overwhelm us?
I think when it comes to trauma and when it comes to stress, one thing that one of my very first social work professors told me was a lesson he learned on an airplane. And that lesson was when the flight attendant, was talking about what to do if there's an issue on the plane. And they always tell you if the masks come down, secure your mask first. And I think that's one of the most important lessons that we can teach people when dealing with stress, especially when you're talking about situations where we know that the recovery process is going to be long and it's going to be arduous. And then we're coupling it with this novel pandemic. Do what you need to do to find moments of peace throughout the day so that you are building your resiliency to be able to go through this process, whatever that is. If it's unplugging the TV, not watching the news, if it's going outside, and telling your partner, your kids, whoever, I need 30 minutes to myself, I need an hour to myself. Sometimes I know, especially when we're in situations where we're talking about finances being stretched, sometimes people will forego things that bring them joy because they know their finances, they don't necessarily have the expendable income, but sometimes it's necessary for your mental health. So you have to, weigh those options of if I don't buy this book, that means I have a $10, $20 extra to spend towards groceries or something else. But I went to bed last night with tears in my eyes. Maybe I need to get this book to help me make it through. So you really have to be mindful of your personal state. Um, and then once you're mindful of it and once you have your plan of action, also, be mindful that there are some resources out there for mental health. I've seen a lot of restrictions being released because of COVID to make opportunities and ways for telehealth. And so looking into some opportunities that maybe there's a counselor somewhere that you can call, maybe a grief counselor, doesn't necessarily have to be a psychiatrist because in these situations with stress, we don't really need medication. Sometimes we just need to vent and vent to a professional. So looking for those opportunities as well to really help you manage the stress because we know that the stress is there. And unfortunately, we know the stress is not going away anytime soon. So it's not something that we want to ignore. It's something that we want to learn to cope with for the duration of the process.
Thank you. You mentioned telehealth, which got me thinking about almost another new development that we're seeing right now. You've probably heard the buzzword digital divide is increasing, right? But the digital divide existed and it's been around for a while. I think this pandemic is just highlighting the inequity of it, right? And especially for us here in North Carolina, something that I am noticing as we're continuing our work, but we're having to do so from remote models. We're having to do so in different ways that relies on technology. And we can't rely on face-to-face interactions in a way that we could before. Um, you know, parts of our state don't have access to internet resources and access to the type of technology that could make resources open up for certain communities, right? You know, if you live in a pocket that doesn't, your community doesn't have access to really good internet, then that's already disadvantaging you and your community members. So where you couldn't have access to telehealth resources or maybe be able to, view this recording that we're making right now. So have you seen any resources out there or have any suggestions for communities and individuals who are feeling as though they're falling into that divide of where they don't have access to technology, they need help desperately, but are unable to really access things now that this pandemic has pushed people to be even more remote than before?
Unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot around if it that's not centered around education, and I think that is a serious lack, not just within the state, with across the country, because, and I know it is important for our children to continue to maintain their education. That is important, but there are so many other things going on that, like you said, this digital divide has really been highlighted. You know, for instance, I have individuals who I'm close to who are in, living a sober life in substance recovery. And I know that, AA has gone digital. And so they are able to have their meetings digitally. You meet with your sponsor digitally. But again, if you are a recovering alcoholic and you're in an area where that's not accessible to you because there's just not good Wi-Fi in your area, there's spotty Wi-Fi, or you're one of those already working poor individuals who could not have afford Wi-Fi before. Where does that leave you? And no one has really looked at that gap to understand how do we access that. But I think that this pandemic has really highlighted that as this country and as this world moves more and more digital, we have to make sure that everyone has access to that, or it's not beneficial.
I completely agree. Completely agree. I know our project has made an effort to balance those needs that you were just talking about. We're making needs assessments now, not just for legal or social work needs, but now health and safety needs. And so, what is best for a client now includes considerations in public health that we didn't have to use before. And sometimes they conflict, right? So that does make it very difficult. Absolutely. Well, uh, I'm thinking a little bit here. I think we've covered a wide range of topics today. Um, and is there anything else that you'd like to share, or anything else that maybe we should hit on before we wrap it up today?
One last thing I think that we may want to touch on is what is considered vicarious trauma. And that is trauma that we suffer or that we experience not because we necessarily have gone through a thing, but those around us are going through it, our community is going through it. And so I get a lot with my clients. I'm seeing of them saying, they're just stressed, they're just tired, and they other than the rebuild process, they may not be going through, they may not have lost their job to the coronavirus. They may not have suffered financial loss, but people around them have suffered it. And it becomes a lot. Sometimes, with clients, I have clients who are like, I had to take in my sister, her husband, and their kids, and it's a lot. You do it from a place of love, you do it from a place of caring, but it's still a lot. It's the transformation of your life. And I think that when we're living in this situation, in this pandemic, even if you have not directly been affected by coronavirus, you have been affected by coronavirus. It has changed all of our lives. It has changed our day to days. It has changed how we operate. I can personally say for me, I used to love shopping at Walmart at 2 in the morning because there was no one there, and I can't do that anymore. Um, and so with everything going on in the world, I think we have to recognize that sometimes the stress that we observe is enough to cause true stress in our life. That's just like as if we went through it ourselves, because it's a lot and we get inundated for it. So I often, I tell people sometimes you need to just unplug. I had to do it myself, just completely unplug myself from social media for a while so that I had a chance to go throughout my day not without that added stress of seeing even more in a wider range. And that is one thing that the internet and the digital age has brought us, is so much that we were separated from before is at hand now. So now in North Carolina, not only am I going through the stress of what's going on in the news and the pandemic and my job, now I'm also very much aware of what's going on in Lebanon. I'm very much aware of what's going on in California with the fires. All of this is constantly there. And I think sometimes it's very necessary to recognize that even if you're just the kind of person who likes to know what's going on in the news, that has an ability to add trauma and stress to your life, and be very much cognizant of that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely. And I can imagine that there might almost be almost a little bit of guilt too associated with vicarious trauma, and that
Mhm.
I might not be experiencing it directly, so I'm feeling guilty about it, and I'm also feeling the trauma of it, of the experience, and so you've got just so much going on there too. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And please, if any of this, especially some of the legal issues that we hit on today, if you're experiencing any home ownership crises, if you're experiencing mortgage issues, foreclosure, please contact Legal Aid of North Carolina to see if you're eligible for our services. The Disaster Relief Project that we work on specifically assists disaster survivors of Hurricane Florence, and we can help you on your recovery process. So if any of this hit home with you, please reach out to us and see if we can help you with your legal needs.